the cool thing about the Funk Flex freestyle from December is that it's left no doubt in anybody's mind that you are one of the greatest of all time, right? You know, even non-hip hop fans were wigging out over the 10-minute freestyle. I'm curious, like, what was your reaction to the response from that moment?
I mean, in all honesty, my response was like, you know, it was almost, well, it's about time.
I'm not a typical arrogant American on prescribed medicine. I'm sick as I ever been. Rolling out of the dealership in the McLaren. These rappers is Peter Pan, I'm Pan-African. Space Invader.
Tariq Trotter has been known for 3 decades in the hip-hop world as Black Thought of the Roots. You can see him on network TV every weeknight. But somehow, in December, he unlocked overnight sensation status when his epic 10-minute-long freestyle on Hot 97 blew minds across the internet. Now he's finally releasing his first solo project, a series of EPs called Streams of Thought. And when I sat down to talk to the talented Mr. Trotter, he revealed sides of his life that might surprise even his most devoted fans.
I feel like that freestyle sort of solidified the reason, like why there must be a platform for me, you know, that's different than my platform in the Roots.
But at the same time, you've like defied gravity in hip hop. If we think of hip hop as always being described as this youth culture and it's controlled by, you know, the whims and desires of the young people and the kind of music they make. And after a long, illustrious career, you're at the top of your game. Usually it's the flip side.
I mean, there's something to be said about, you know, the depth that one gains, you know, over the years. Like this, you know, I come from a place of experience that no, you know, 19 or 20 or even 30-year-old could manage to come from because they haven't lived through it. You know what I'm saying? Bobby Womack told me once when we were working together, he said, you got to go through it to get to it. And that, you know, that really stuck with me. That's just, you know, it's real, you know what I mean?
No doubt.
You have to go through it to get to it. So there's no way, you know, a young MC can touch on as much as I touch on with regards to life, because I've lived it, you know what I mean?
I don't know if people realize, like, you have what might be one of the hardest backstories in hip hop. You know, for instance, by 16, you've lost both of your parents to tragedy. You have one foot in music, one foot in the streets of South Philly, but you've never really exploited your story the way that so many artists have, you know, for solo success and fame. I mean, I'm curious, like, has that always been a conscious choice, or?
You know, we all suffer tragedy. We all are gonna go through tragic events in life, and you know, it's gonna usually affect you in one of two ways. You know, it can drive you to self-destruction. You know, or it can drive you. It can work as a motivator. I mean, I use my experiences in the same way that, you know, some of the artists that you probably have in mind do. But I mean, I feel like it's more of I use it more as a tool, and as a motivational tool than exploit it. You know?
I got you. Well, let's talk about your parents a little bit, if you don't mind. I'm curious. How old were you when you found out, you know, not only how your father died, but kind of who he was?
I was, I want to say, like 6 or 7 or so when, you know, I really began to realize, all right, my father was murdered, but I, as far back as I can remember, I'd always known that, you know, he had passed away. As I grew older, I mean, even now, you know, I continue to just acquire little tidbits of information. I might run into somebody on the street who's like, yo, you know, I'm a big fan. By the way, I was a good friend of your father's. And, you know, they'll give me some information, you know, something that I may not have ever known. about my father and the way he was. You know, just because it was the 70s, you know what I mean, at the time that, you know, that I lost my father, there wasn't that much documentation, you know what I'm saying? There were a couple stories like from newspapers, like newspaper clippings around that were around the time that his body was found. But, you know, like this is the era of microfiche, you know what I mean? As opposed to, you know, being able to just Google what had taken place. So, I mean, there have been some books that have come out over the years about the Philly Black Mafia, or an organization called Black Brothers, Inc. And, you know, just information that has come out in more recent years about a particular mosque in Philly, Mosque number 12 in the Philadelphia Islamic community at that time, that has shed a little bit more light on, you know, my father and what his sort of dealings were, you know, like one side of what his dealings were. But yeah, there's still very much that is that remains you know, a mystery, you know, to me, even to this day.
Yeah. That's interesting because I think about how, you know, so much of what we learn about our parents, you know, whether they're present or not, ends up shaping us. You know, one generation kind of influences the other in terms of, you know, your identity and how you look at yourself and what you imagine your possibilities to be, or the blood that's flowing through your veins. You know, I don't know how much you've thought about that kind of stuff in relation to a father that you didn't really get to know in life, but that you've continued to learn about throughout your life?
I mean, I definitely feel like I'm similar to my father in many ways that, you know, that aren't by choice.
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You know, from what I understand, my father was a very serious person.
Okay.
He was, you know, also a comedian.
Okay.
You know. So yeah, there's a bunch of what I do and how I move that I feel like is innate, you know, because of that the blood that, you know, sort of runs through my veins.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Now, in your epic freestyle, there's a section where, I mean, you talk about so much incredible stuff. You know, people are still unpacking everything that you talk about. It's like a dissertation. It's philosophy. There's literary references, there's politics and socioeconomics, it's everything. But there's also some personal stuff in there. And at one point you talk about your mother, a working class, very loving woman, you call her. And later you say she was introduced to that substance abuse on some of the strongest drugs that the government produced. How did she die? And how did that impact you at the time?
My mother, when I was about, I want to say 11 or 12, that, you know, that was the height of, you know, the crack epidemic in Philly. And it hit our community, you know, really hard. And my mom, though she always, you know, maintained the employment, she, you know, she was still working and, you know, trying to keep a roof over our heads. Yeah, she had, you know, succumbed to drug addiction. And that was super disruptive in our family. And it, you know, at the time, I kind of decided myself that, you know, it would be a better fit for me to stay with my grandmother who lived nearby for a while, like my mother's mother. And that kind of grew into me staying with my grandmother through most of high school because my mom was still struggling. I succumbed to the streets on the flip side by, like, I started selling drugs. So it was weird, man. It was in one small, you know, the same little bubble. Like, my older brother had been selling drugs and you know, committing crimes, and he was incarcerated, you know, and I was, you know, almost following in his footsteps and in the footsteps of any and every other role model that I'd seen in the community by, you know, following suit. You know, it was a rites of passage to, you know, to sell drugs, and especially for me because I had a job. It was like I always had a job since the second grade. You know, there were a couple times when I didn't have an official place of employment, but I hustled. I, you know, sold newspapers. I sold soft pretzels. I would clean backyards, basements. Like I always made a way for myself. But even within that, it was cool to sell crack. So, you know, I would go to work and then use the money that I made from work to, you know, try and buy crack to sell. And Uncle came in and you know, kind of scooped me up off the drug strip one day, and said, "Hey, you know, I've spoke with your grandmother and spoke with your mom, and we're gonna send you to Michigan to stay with your other uncle." So yeah, I was 15. I knew that you know, if I came back to Philly, you know, to South Philly at least, to that same community, it was only going to end, you know, one of two ways. I would probably, you know, die young, or I would be, you know, incarcerated. I would, you know, wind up in the system. So I stayed there for not even a whole year, but I went to school in Detroit for a while, kind of got my act together, and came back to Philly. So this is around the time that my mom, you know, that I lost my mother. Okay. She was living in a different part of the city, still, you know, very much in the streets. You know, she was living with a boyfriend, but you know, she was still like out there and, you know, in the streets at night. And you know, it's hard to really say how she wound up where she was, but she was on the streets one night, and a young person who was maybe 21 or 22 years old, but who was mentally, you know, unstable, imbalanced, you know, like snatched her up and dragged her into like an abandoned house, and it was on a desolate, almost deserted block, and you know, she was assaulted, and it was, you know, a very violent death. You know what I mean? She was sexually assaulted. She was stabbed multiple times. She was strangled with you know, a lamp cord. And just knowing that she was a fighter, I know that, you know, she put up, you know, as much of a fight as she could. But you know, we lost her. She had been no one had heard from her for about 3 or 4 days. Which, you know, the sad part about, you know, growing up where I did and when I did is when you haven't heard from someone for a couple days, the first thing we do instinctively is, you know, start the search. We start with the hospitals, and then we start with the jails, and then we start, you know, beyond that, it's, you know, the morgue. You know what I mean? But she was unidentifiable. You know what I'm saying? We had to identify her by some old dental records. So it was like, it was crazy. It was messy, and, you know, we couldn't have an open casket funeral. It was, you know, just the worst that you could expect is the end that she met, you know?
Man, I know that's been a long time ago. I'm still sorry to hear that.
Yeah, thanks, man. Thank you.
I know you've talked about, like you say, growing up in that environments like South Philly in that time. So much of that was normal in some ways, that you didn't necessarily realize how much trauma you were experiencing until later in life.
Absolutely.
I'm curious, like, how does that shape or affect your artistic identity, and how do you, looking back now, imagine you've healed from that?
I mean, well, for me, the arts has always been sort of my saving grace. You know, like the moments in life that I cherish most were those, you know, brief moments when I would get to escape, either, you know, like mentally I would get to escape because I would be deep in the creative process, or, you know, physically I would leave the neighborhood for a little bit to go to art class on Saturday mornings, or, you know, to go in the summertime. My mom would sign me up for art camp, and that took place out in the middle of Fairmount Park in Philly. So, you know, just those little small pockets of getting away from the neighborhood gave me just a different perspective when I kind of returned, you know. Yeah, it's always been, you know, for me about the arts, man.
Thanks for the memories. For first and third of the month, check deliveries. Agencies in the early 80s for giving cheese to families with parents who had drug dependencies.
Well, let's skip ahead a little bit, a lot of bit. As the Roots, you and Questlove over the past 25 years, you went from busking on sidewalks to playing the White House, right?
Yeah.
Multiple occasions during Obama's administration. What has that evolution been like to go from A to Z?
I mean, almost surreal for us.
Yeah.
It felt, you know, like something we had been working towards our whole lives, but, you know, maybe didn't think we'd ever, you know, reach. Man, I used to think, man, I should just get a DJ, you know, because that'd be a better format, you know, within which to showcase my skills. I felt like, you know, the band at the time, like how cumbersome the instruments were, you know, a huge upright bass, and then, you know, Questlove on the, you know, a big dude on the drums, and I felt like that was all taken away sort of from the focus on me. You know what I mean?
I think you've always maintained, you kind of talked about this a little bit, kind of a guarded presence. But songs like Thank You, which is on this first Streams of Thought Volume 1 release, it feels a lot more unguarded. It feels a lot more personal. You know, I hear you make references to, you know, your woman or your family. Is this Black Thought unmasking a little bit?
Yeah, I feel like this is definitely, you know, Black Thought unmasking. In my process, I'm always first and foremost personal, and, you know, I feel like in the rethinking, overthinking of said material, some of that you know, vulnerability gets, you know, or in the past has gotten lost. So this is just more raw emotion, but what Streams of Thought is about is like trusting my, you know how people say, I should have trusted my first mind. If I'd have went with my first mind, and you know, it's about going with my gut.
Okay.
And yeah, that just, you know, some of the music is gonna feel a lot more unguarded. You know what I'm saying? And,
you know, all of that really makes this a good time to be at this point where you can do what I feel like a lot of your longtime fans, as you speak of, have been really wanting from you for a long time, which is, you know, that solo project. But again, I think that we've heard about projects in the past. People have gotten excited, like, oh man, Black Thought's about to do this solo joint. You know, there was Masterpiece Theater, there was Dangerous Thoughts with Danger Mouse, there was the talented Mr. Trotter. Them not seeing the light of day, has any of that ever had anything to do with you feeling like a bigger sense of obligation to the collective rather than to individual pursuits?
Absolutely. It's had everything to do with that.
Okay.
You know, it's always been about, you know, the greater good of our organization, you know, like for me. And though the announcement of you know, those sorts of all those solo efforts that I've announced, it creates a different, like a new, almost, it breathes new life into the awareness of me as an artist. The Roots brand sort of always has to be maintained, you know. And we're just in a point, we're at a place now where primetime TV affords us a different sort of visibility, and I'm able to, you know, kind of take a step back and focus on some of the other energy, some of the other, you know, creative energy that I sort of still need to get out. None of this is my solo album.
Okay.
You know, it's just, it's a chance to see me in a different light.
We're at the point in the industry where there's really not even an appreciation for the group dynamic, right? It's kind of like the same thing that happened with black bands from the 70s to the 80s and that type of thing.
And then we're both, we're like, you know, we're a black band and a rap group.
Yeah.
So, you know.
Was there in any way a level of protection being in a group where you weren't necessarily, you were the front man, but you weren't necessarily the spokesman of the group. And did that in any way give you a sense of comfort or protection that you didn't have to be all the way out there?
I definitely found, comfort in that zone, you know what I mean? In being able to, like, I'm an introverted person, which is, I guess, doesn't work. Like, it's not the best type of person to be if you're gonna be an entertainer.
Right.
But that's just how, luck would have it. That's how it worked out for me. Like, I'm an artist. I really enjoy the process, and I appreciate, how cathartic it is for me. But I don't like taking pictures. I don't enjoy being on a stage and being under a microscope, under a spotlight. It's there's something that's very, it's frightening. It's it builds up angst and anxiety within me. And it always has. I've been in the Roots since I was 14 years old, but it's never been something that I've enjoyed. Most recently I started doing stand-up comedy sometimes. Like, I'll get on stage and do stand-up routines, and it's super frightening because the stand-up comedians, like people who have to publicly speak on that level, like you're at your most vulnerable. You know what I mean? Especially like if the material is based on life experiences and it's just you and the mic and the lights and the people, you can reach out and touch the people. There's, that's really not my cup of tea, but it's therapeutic, you know what I'm saying? Like to work through that. And I feel like it makes me, it has made me and continues to make me a better artist.
Yeah. So do you tell jokes in the traditional sense?
I tell stories that, people find funny.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I want to make a request. This is usually the point in the interview with Black Thought where somebody would ask you to freestyle.
Okay.
But I would love to hear a Black Thought joke right now. Like, can you give us a story? Can you give us something?
Something that is funny, that I'd use sometimes in my, if I'm doing comedy, is the fact that I'm now often mistaken for the rapper Rick Ross.
Okay.
And sometimes little kids come up to me, shaking, and do you mind if I take a picture? And I'll take a picture and I'll hear one whisper to the other, I love Rick Ross. Or I've had people come and talk to me for 5, 7, 10 minutes about how I've impacted their lives and how important my music has been.
Yeah.
And I might start to assume that they recognize me, and then they'll get to the end and it's like, thank you, Rick Ross. You know what I mean? Just like, man, whatever, fuck it.
I'm not arachnophobia, black petroleum, ceremoniously holy when at the podium. Even though it's hotter than weapons grade plutonium, the people try and check for the return of the Ichiban. Obi-Wan, universe, you owe me one solid. My homie Gonzalez.
Like, to me, your name alone, Black Thought, has always had like this really rich, kind of dark, like double or triple entendre meaning to it, or like just a metaphor for Black America itself. But it's also kind of ironic because you rarely hear Jimmy Fallon address you as Black Thought on The Tonight Show. And, it kind of reminds me of like that double consciousness existence that W.E.B. Du Bois talked about in The Souls of Black Folk. Like you're almost too black for TV, but yet there you are on TV.
Right.
I'm curious, like, has that ever presented any kind of internal conflict for you at all?
It has, presented some internal conflict. And the way I address it is in just maintaining that, separatism. The fact that Jimmy refers to me only as Tariq on primetime television is right on par with me making a conscious effort to be more vulnerable and show more vulnerability and to be more human. You know what I mean? And to be more accessible
Exactly.
to my audience. I feel like Black Thought is a name that has so much meaning and depth, you know, to not only to me, but, you know, to my fans. That it's something that I want to hold on to a little bit, you know, tighter. You know, so when at the onset of Late Night with Jimmy Fallon, when it was like, you know, what are we going to refer to you guys as? I don't know. I chose Tariq. I feel like I'm able to compartmentalize in that and say, you know, on the Tonight Show, I am, you know, Tariq. Now, there have been moments where I am referred to as Black Thought by my peers or by, you know, people who are my fans, or, you know, when I'm the musical guest, when I'm about to do, you know, something serious, as opposed to, you know, like something funny.
Right,
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, I mean, it kind of goes both ways.
So earlier this month, the Kennedy Center hosts this special stage reading of Ta-Nehisi Coates' book, Between the World and Me. Not only are you in the cast, but you give like this climactic, you know, verse at a really high point in the production. And it symbolizes, you know, everything that Coates is writing to his son in this book about what it means to be Black in America at this time.
I'm depicted as being a villain, dangerous, huh? Half dozen in one hand, but a six in the other. Shit is more than a suntan when it still live in color. Black as oblivion, black as obsidian, black as the sky at midnight, out to meridian. I am black as a portrait with Diddy, Tupac and Biggie in.
And, you know, the whole theater lights up with all of this emotion after your verse. And later on, Ta-Nehisi comes out to read the final passage, right? And before he does it, he turns to you and he says, I would trade my whole book to have written those Black Thought verses. Right? I'm curious, like, what did that mean for you in that moment to be hearing this from, like, the preeminent writer on, you know, what it means to be Black in America today, basically calling you a literary peer at that time?
I don't know, it lent a certain sort of validity to what I'm doing, what I've been doing. We met in person earlier in the week at the same sort of event. And it was there that, you know, he kind of revealed to me that during the time in his life when he was, you know, still, quote unquote, trying to become a writer, you know, trying to be a writer, that my style of writing was, you know, what he was kind of modeling his style of writing after. You know what I mean? He was trying to capture a similar voice. You know, so yeah, to come to the realization that, you know, my work inspired the work that in turn re-inspired me. You know what I'm saying? It was just a dope sort of revelation. Yeah.
No doubt. Well, speaking of the book, you know, there's a line in there, and it's also quoted in the stage reading, and it says, "Part of me thinks that your very vulnerability brings you closer to the meaning of life." As Black Thought, it seems like you haven't necessarily always been quite as open to exposing your own vulnerabilities in rhyme. But it also seems like that's starting to change a little bit. And I'm curious, like, what's provoking that change, and how, if at all, does that line resonate with, you know, where you feel like you are in your creative journey?
I feel like, you know, hip hop, specifically like the discipline of like rapping, like the rap part of hip hop it was founded upon, you know, like the projection of oneself as being larger than life.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah.
And, you know, that being the foundation, you know, it evolved into sort of, you know, it's always been, you know, about winner takes all, and it's been about the polar opposite of showing vulnerability. You know, I've been at it for quite some time, and I don't know. I feel like just as an artist, as I've developed as an artist, I've sort of come to realize, or just to better understand, that art at its best is able to show vulnerability, show, you know, the humanity of the artist, and in turn sort of inspire that humanity and vulnerability in the beholder, I guess, you know what I mean?
How much does pain, if at all, play a role in your process in terms of inspiration, in terms of creativity? You know, I guess I'm thinking again about your past, and, you know, how our past continue to impact who we are, even once we've, you know, you've gone so far from that point now, you know, being raised in South Philly in the 80s, crack era, you've gone to the Grammys, you've gone to the White House, you and the Roots have toured all over the world, you know, 100 times over. You're on the Tonight Show, you're household names, you know, and both Black Thought and Tariq Trotter at this point. But I'm wondering how much of that still fuels your creative process. Is it something that you're even cognizant of at this point?
I'm definitely cognizant of it. That pain plays a huge role in the process. It's you know, that's the fire from which, you know, the fuel comes. You know, it is I don't know. It's about, like, I dance on that line where, you know, how people say it's darkest before the dawn. Yeah. You know, or just in art, in visual art, like the darkest point is the point at which darkness and light meet. You know what I mean? It's both the darkest and the brightest. So that's the line. Like that's sort of where I live as an artist. And you know, just over time, just growing to understand that position more, and that's sort of what I play, you know. So probably my happiest music, and, you know, the brightest, most meaningful, impactful stuff that I write comes from that place of pain, you know.
Do you ever stop to think about what your parents would think about where you are now, how far you've come?
Yeah, you know, sometimes I do think about, you know, if my parents were still alive, like how they feel, how they feel about the music, how my career has, you know, progressed, developed. I think, I mean, I would hope that they would be proud. You know, I know my mom, she was a musician at some point. I think she was in like she was a singer in a group when she was a teenager. I know she always wanted me to be an artist, which is why she started putting me into art school when I was super young. And I think all she wanted from me was, you know, just that escapism. And, well, the fact that, for one, I didn't finish high school in the High School of the Arts, that would have been, you know, she would have been disappointed by that. Okay. And then the fact that I, you know, started college, she would have been elated that I went to college, but, you know, disappointed that I left before I graduated college. Okay. But she would have been, you know, super excited and proud that the reason I left is because, you know, I was going to pursue a career in music. And, you know, the fact that, you know, I don't know how many years later I'm still here and I'm still in it is, you know, is a triumph.
Places that I've known, many of which I've outgrown. Thanks for the ride home. Some motherfuckers tried to make me give what's mine to them. Thank goodness for my decent aim with one eye closed. Gangsters and fly hoes, freaks and sideshows. Mistakes I made in the past that only God knows. Usually my preference would be to travel the high roads. Sometimes I stray from the path, that's no surprise though. I had to use this expression of my gratitude, that my attitude didn't limit my latitude. In cases when I had to do what I had to do, even though I was spazzing, boo, I wasn't mad at you. This unbroken token of appreciation.